Welcome to the English with Kirsty podcast from www.englishwithkirsty.com. Here I'll be sharing with you tips, information and other learning resources so that you can improve your business English.
Hi everybody, and welcome back to the English with Kirsty podcast. And today I have another special guest, and we're here to talk about something I haven't talked about at all on the podcast before, so that will be new for you. Welcome. It's really good that you're here. Maybe you could start by introducing yourself and telling us a bit about who you are and what you do.
Hello, Kirsty. Thank you for inviting me. Hello, everyone who's listening to this episode. My name is Diego Perez. I'm a localization specialist based in Brazil, and I work with game localization mainly, but I also do marketing translation and software localization. So yeah, I've been working with game localization, particularly for almost 10 years now. I've been, involved in many projects, some of them famous, like Final Fantasy VII Remake, and StarCraft Remastered, and most recently also Far Cry, I think, Far Cry 6. Yeah. And right now I'm localizing the indie game Kenshi 2 into Brazilian Portuguese. We have only one translator per language. We are localizing almost 3,000 words. But yeah, it's a long-term project, and with no end in sight.
Mm-hmm.
But also beyond that project, I also translate other mobile games, and I'm also involved with teaching other translators how to enter the game localization market and mentoring people who want to improve in their career who are at their early stages. Yeah.
You had a course for that, didn't you? You started offering a course, is that right?
Yeah, exactly. I have a course on TranslaStars since I think it was March from last year. So yeah, it's 1 year now of that course. I've received positive feedback. I'm really excited to keep working on more teaching things, I guess, to people and how they can navigate this complicated industry. And yeah, and my course is it's a 10-hour course, just giving an overview of how game localization works, what do you need to get into the market, which skills you need to develop, how you can keep improving, and basically also showing some tools and how to operate in that market and get more clients for your freelance career. Yeah.
Okay, so if anybody's interested in the course, I will add the link as well to the show notes page for this episode. And then if you want to go into this industry, then you can find out more. But I think it'd be good to go a bit further because the reason I asked you to come on the podcast was to talk about your history with games, really, and how that helped you as a language learning tool. I know it's your job now, but tell us something about your first introduction to games, and specifically how specific games helped you with English, or how you developed your English by playing them.
Sure, exactly. That's a really interesting story. I don't think I've ever had the opportunity to share it, so really looking forward to this. So yeah, I started learning. I actually started playing video games. I can't even remember when. I think it's more like I think if I access my first memories, video games mingled with a lot of the memories I have from my early childhood. So yeah, and at the times, it was the 90s, early 90s, like 95, okay, mid 90s. I was so I have two older brothers. They are 9 years and 7 years older than I am, and they were already involved in video games as children. So I grew up in that medium, and they had an advanced English level for their age. They had been studying it for quite some years, and they played video games basically. So I started playing those video games with them and by myself. And at the time, the games in general, they weren't translated to Portuguese, because at that time our country, they just didn't have the means to make it economically viable to the developers. So it wasn't seen as a profitable market at all. It was really overlooked in favor of other European languages. And so we had no choice but to play games in English. And the good thing about that, I guess, is that we are gamers in general, not only my family and I, were able to learn a few words here and there, right? So words that were more obvious because of their context, we could, start picking up on some of those words. And for me in particular, because I had brothers that spoke fluent English, I was able to learn as they played. So I have memories like when I was 8 years old, and one of my brothers was playing a role-playing game called Breath of Fire 3. It was one of my favorite games, and it had a lot of dialogue, right? A lot of dialogue, just characters speaking to one another all the time. And I really liked that game because the characters you played with, they could transform into dragons. It was really
Okay,
fantasy
cool.
stuff. They could transform into dragons, and you had another character, a female character who had spells and all that. The characters were really colorful and really exciting. And then as my brother played, I wanted to know more about the story, right? Because otherwise it would be only just characters moving in the screen and all that. And
It's not
I
fun.
wanted, yeah, exactly. And since there was so much dialogue, I think instinctively I noticed that I was missing on a lot of things. So I started asking my brother to translate as he played what he was playing, so that I could understand what was going on there.
Was he happy to do that? Was like, oh no, not again? Or was he happy to help you to learn?
Yeah, he was always really, really
That's cool.
patient. Yeah, and still is. And yeah, so he started like translating. I mean, he wouldn't translate everything because, yeah, sometimes I think it got tiring, right? You just you want to play and progress through the game. But yeah, at least the main story, at least he was translating that. And then I started like memorizing the words. I think is the first conscious effort of language acquisition that I can remember of. When, for example, a character said excellent job. So excellent is a cognate in Portuguese. So I already had that to go with. So job, what's job? Then he told me what job means. So that's how I started picking up on those words at the age of 8 at the time. And it was really interesting also because uh, recalling those words, it were like a pastime to me. Because, for example, when he wasn't playing or when I wasn't near the screen, I would just by myself start recalling the words that I had learned in the previous day or in that same day. So that's how I started building the vocabulary. But of course, that didn't develop into actually acquiring a language until a few years later. So yeah, and that's another story. If you have any questions,
Yeah, I guess it's like
for
building
that.
the foundation. So later you're going to have to learn how you can put all these words together and how the grammar works and things like that. But you already had this started to build this vocabulary, like a bank of words that you could later use. And I guess like for an 8-year-old, it would be very hard if you said like, oh, you have to learn all this stuff at school. And 8-year-old, no, that's boring. But if it's something you're interested in and motivated to learn about, then that will make you much more likely to do it from your own, because you want to, your own initiative rather than someone telling you. So I think that's really, really good because nobody's telling you, hey, learn English. You're doing it because you want to. So how did you
Yes.
then go on from there to learning, picking up the words, remembering them, to beginning to use them yourself? I mean, did you do any kind of multiplayer games where you had to communicate with other people, or was it mainly the text on the screen, that the dialogues that the characters were having with one another?
Exactly. The first option, actually, you guessed it correct. It was a multiplayer game. That's the next chapter of the story. So yeah, those precious words that I learned from that game in particular, thanks to them, I was able to play some games by myself because like you said, it's about building a foundation. So when I learned the basic stuff through the dialogue interaction and all that, then I could play some games on my own and started learning things by myself, right? I learned how to use a dictionary, and that's how I kept on building the vocabulary. But of course, it was just I was just developing my reading, right? I wasn't developing writing and other aspects of language fluency. So the next step, well, I think at that time I was 10 years old. So like 2 years later, I started playing a game, a multiplayer game called The Forthcoming. It's like, some fantasy stuff, medieval fantasy stuff, and there's like a messiah that will come for the fourth time, and that messiah will destroy the world, and all that kind of stuff. And it was a multiplayer online game. And I started playing it in a Brazilian server. So I was, just speaking in Portuguese, even if the game was in English. So yeah, I kept developing vocabulary in that game. But then that server, it was discontinued. It was no longer economically viable. But
Okay.
I was still very much invested in that game. So I had to look for other ways to play it. So that's how I looked for other servers from other languages. And then I started playing with people from foreign countries, and they were all communicating in English. And that's how I started learning how to write in English. And again, that same brother, he had a special role in that because we had two computers at the time. We were three brothers but two computers, and then we sat one next to the other. And I was constantly asking him because I needed to communicate with people. So I said, I just asked, okay, how do I say this? I need this person. I want to ask this person if they could heal me or if they could help me somehow. How do I tell them that? And so basically that's how I started developing my writing because it's weird because it didn't feel like learning a foreign language at the time. I just
You were playing the
needed to
game. That's
communicate. Yeah, exactly. I was playing the game and just trying to communicate to people what I needed, and that's how things started moving. But I didn't have much knowledge from grammar, so I expect that my English was pretty much broken.
But if they healed you, if they did what you wanted, then obviously they understood you. And sometimes that's the most important thing. Like, does the other person
Yeah,
understand? And I
yeah,
guess that is also a really good way to learn because it makes sense to you. It's functional. It's not like something theoretical in a book like that you may never need. It's something that you did actually need. And so the next time you needed that thing, you'll probably remember more easily because it's relevant to your situation, to your life, what you're trying to do. How
exactly.
was the attitude of the other people? I mean, was it generally like a friendly server, or were people quite I don't know, what was the atmosphere like there? Was it friendly? Was it supportive, or was it kind of aggressive? And
I think it had a bit of both, especially because of the times and all that. So I was 9 years old, so that was in the 2000, yeah.
so you
So
learned some curse
the
words as
year
well then.
2000. Yeah. So things were still, a bit. I mean, these kinds of environments, they are still toxic to these days. So yeah, at the time it was also toxic, but I met a lot of nice people, and some of them they already knew that I was learning English, so they started helping with my language acquisition process too, so that I didn't depend on asking things to my brother or looking them up. And so when people noticed that I was doing some kind of mistake or something that could be easily corrected, they helped they helped me with that. So for example, the difference between do or does, I was just choosing randomly that because I
Okay.
didn't understand how to agree the pronoun with the verb inflection. So I remember a person who helped me with that, just explained how it worked for me, and we were just playing the game, right? We weren't there to discuss language and all that. But I guess a lot of the nice thing about playing multiplayer games is that it's not only about the game itself, but about the connections you make in there. So yeah, I started, I befriended people, so they helped me with my process too, and also to help. And they were also helping me communicate what I needed with them. So that's how
It's good
it
for them too.
developed.
Like if you
Exactly.
can communicate better, if it's a cooperative game where you're supposed to be working as a team, then it's good for everyone if everyone can communicate better.
Of course, yeah, exactly. So yeah, and at the time I was already passionate about the language itself, because it was one of my key abilities as a child. So whenever I thought of something that I could do really well, I said, oh, I'm really good at communicating in English, because I don't know, 10 or 11 years old, and I can already do it. Just so different from what I see in school. Like school, we are at the time I was learning like colors and simple objects, and other than that, yeah, by myself, I could just communicate ideas, and it was not super advanced communication, of course, especially because I was a child or almost a teenager. But yeah, it was a lot more advanced than what I was learning at school.
Especially if it was about topics like dragons or something that you knew about, something you've been, like these specific topics that I guess you had more vocabulary than any of the other classmates if they weren't playing games and they didn't know. And did the teachers ask where you got that from or why it was like that?
Not at school. I think that question didn't come until I actually started learning in a proper English course. I think I was 15 or 16 years old when I started learning English formally, and not just school or games. And I just knew like the most random stuff, like I don't know, plaster. Well, why do you know what plaster means? Oh, because in the game I play, I can have houses, and I know the kind of material I can build things
Okay.
in. So I had a lot of vocabulary that wasn't expected to have at that age, and especially when I played a lot of medieval games. So things like shield, sword, and mace, all that kind of things.
Okay.
I just had it.
Castles and horses and
Yeah.
yeah. So was it always text chat or did you have any games where you were actually like speaking to the other players?
Yeah, that's also well, a very interesting question, because I didn't develop much in terms of listening and speaking until much later. So still to this day, they are probably the weakest part of my English fluency, because I mean, all everything that I learned at those early years, it was about just about text, right? So speaking and listening didn't come until much later. So basically, because of the English course I was attending at the age of 16. That's when I actually started developing my English speaking and listening. I mean, I already watched TV shows and all that, but I wasn't paying close attention to English, right? The way I was doing in video games. It was more like passive, just
Yeah, you didn't need it.
watching. Yeah, exactly. So because I had subtitles, so yeah, basically I was like trying to relate what the text to the pronunciation, but I wasn't very much intentional about that. So it wasn't until I started attending that course that I developed more in terms of listening and speaking. And yeah, so I had a lot of trouble with that. It wasn't as natural to me, so I had to make more of an effort, like a conscious effort at least, to learn those things. And listening in particular, it's really difficult. It was really difficult to me because it's so different, right? The pronunciation from the written words. So sometimes people were speaking and I just couldn't understand because I remember not knowing where one word ended and the other started because they are all like articulated together and they become like one big thing, right? So
Yeah, the sounds disappear. We eat them. We
yeah.
when the words merge, and I guess especially if people are speaking quickly as well as we often do when we're not really thinking about it, then it sounds very different. So did you always know that you wanted to work in this field as well? Was that your plan from the beginning, or did it happen more spontaneously?
No, it wasn't my plan, to be honest, because when I finished school and entered university, my first choice of graduation was actually veterinary school because
Oh, wow. Okay.
yeah, because I loved animals. I still do, of course, but I loved animals and I really liked studying biology, chemistry, and all that. It was really something that I was interested in, and I don't know. I just didn't think that I could actually do something professionally with my English. I always I thought that it was one of my key abilities, but I just thought of it like something that would help me do something else. I didn't think that it could be an end in itself, right? So at first, that's how I viewed my English speaking abilities, so to speak. So yeah, and then I studied 1 year in veterinary school, and then I quickly learned that was not something I wanted to do. So I went back to, okay, so what am I good at? What do I like doing? What do I enjoy doing? And that's when I thought that I could and should use English professionally. So and my first idea by enrolling in a university, English language and literature university, was to actually write the video games, not translate them. I wanted to be I wanted to be a writer at the time. So yeah, I I enrolled in university and started learning more about English poetry and all that, and practicing my writing. But I couldn't find a way to actually do what I intended to do, which was to write video games because it's so competitive. And I was and I was I mean I lived in Brazil, so the competition to write video games in English was just out of this world, right? Even for native speakers with excellent writing abilities. So I thought I could do something else, something other than writing those games. And that's when I turned my thoughts to translation, but not game translation initially. I was translating technical documents at first. I spent about 2 years doing that before I moved to game localization.
Maybe that's a good point to explain, because I know what it means, but we shouldn't assume that all the listeners know what localization means and what that entails. So maybe you could give like a quick summary of that, or like an explanation of what that means?
Of course. Well, game localization, I mean, localization for video games specifically, it has more to do with cultural adaptations, with the cultural adaptations we can do to a video game to make them feel like they were originally conceived in Portuguese. So that can take different forms. So, for example, a video game that was produced in the UK or in the USA, well, for example, let's say that you will have a special deal, a special spring deal for spring, right? And then they have all the graphics about spring and all the cultural references, all the references they do and the puns, everything, they all have to do with spring. And when you bring that video game to Brazil, to localize it to Brazilian Portuguese, some developers, if they have the means to do so, they might choose to adapt the season because it's the autumn here. So when a Brazilian player has access to a game that is celebrating the spring, but actually it's the autumn in Brazil, that would break the immersion, that could make them feel like the game wasn't made for them. So I always like to use these seasonal examples because they are really clear to see how it could mean or how it could be received by the audience when you have such a difference. For example, the seasons, right? So it's the autumn here, the weather is different, or maybe there's a difference between summer and winter. For example, at the end of the year, right? It's summertime here, but it's actually winter in the northern hemisphere. So that's an example of how the localization could happen, right?
So like with Christmas references and snow and cold weather and all this doesn't really make sense if it for you Christmas is summertime and
yes.
Yeah, okay. So it makes people feel that it's not just a translation, but it's actually something that is for them as an audience.
Yes, exactly. Another example also is, well, let's say a video game has a reference to a pop star, to an English pop star that is not well known here in Brazil. So some games may choose to adapt that reference for someone who's popular here, right? And maybe that could be another foreign artist or maybe a national artist if it fits, right? So adapting all those kinds of elements, it has a lot to do with what game localization means.
And do you get a lot of freedom, or does that depend who you're working for in terms of how much you can change, how much you can adapt?
Yeah, it depends on the studio, of course, and it also depends on the work, right? So, for example, I was, for example, I think 3 years ago, no, I think it was more than that, 4 years maybe, I was localizing a game that was set in London, right? So all the references, everything had to do with London, right? The neighborhoods and all that. It was pure British and Londoners. So in that case, localization is not something we want to go too deep at. We don't want to miss the characterization of that game. We want the game to feel like it happens in London, right? We don't want to switch the references. We don't want to translate neighborhood names. We don't want to do anything like that, right? We just want to use the Portuguese language for accessibility reasons, so that people can understand what's happening there. But in
like
terms
they're coming
of
to London. Yeah,
exactly. But in terms of cultural references, we want to keep them untouched. That could work somewhat differently for a completely made up game, a fictional world that we want to make to cause the impression that this fictional world was conceived in Portuguese, not English. So we will go to some lengths to make sure all the references they are adapted. And maybe that localization might mean we won't use any Anglicisms or any English words that people generally understand in Portuguese. Even those we will try to adapt in Portuguese. So it really depends first of the kind of work we're doing, the game itself, but also the studio, because studios can feel really differently about this. Some of them maybe they don't want to translate or localize proper nouns because they want to use the same English nouns for all languages so that players can easily search the web to find something they are looking for.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
yeah, for example, in Kenshi 2, the game I'm working in right now, we have this community-minded approach where we want the game like to feel the same in terms of nouns and all that. We want them to feel the same across different languages.
So if there's a
So
forum or people are discussing something or how to do something, or then they don't have to know what it's called in all of the languages.
Exactly. That can be a really real hindrance for Brazilian players, and that could also be the reason why some Brazilian players prefer to play in English, so that if they need to search something in the web or discuss something in the forums, they know exactly the terms they are looking for instead of researching the English version of a translated term.
Do you think that still happens, like particularly with, say, people who are as young as you were when you started? There's a lot more available to them now, so they could play the game in Portuguese. Do some people still choose to do it in English, or is it not as necessary now? So it's not as not so much something that people do.
Yeah, I wonder that a lot. I always find myself asking if the conditions right now they are how similar they are to when I was younger. But what I think is that people want they will not play in English unless they are already fluent with that.
Because
So
you didn't really have a choice, but they do now, which is good because it means that they're not forced to. But
yeah,
so if it's easier.
But I know from my personal experience watching family members who are younger now, who are in their teens and don't have and those that don't speak English, they would just play in Portuguese. They don't see any point in setting the game in English unless they already speak the language. So yeah, I think in that regard, that's how the kids nowadays are approaching game. They just play in Portuguese unless they already know the language English. I mean, yeah.
Okay. And I guess if you going back to the point that you made about being responsible for a language, I guess it's not just the dialogues, is it? It's the interface, it's I guess there's a lot of different types of text that you have to, even the boring stuff that no one reads, like the terms and conditions, I guess all of that needs to be available if you choose.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And as a game localization specialist, we do have those kinds of text to translate to terms and condition and user license agreements. Well, we do receive them occasionally too.
Yeah, I guess that's not as exciting content wise, but it's part of the game, part of the language. So what advice would you give to people who, because I think it's really easy to come up with all the same old stuff, but if you want to improve your English, you should do this and this and this. What advice would you give to people who are gamers, who enjoy that, who enjoy gaming and who maybe need or want to improve their language skills as well?
Well, nowadays some games they have like a really it's really easy to switch one language from to another. You can do that without stopping your gameplay session. You just hit pause and switch from one language to the other. And I think that's a great step if you want to use video games as a tool to improve your English speaking skills, because you can play in English, and if you are blocked somehow and you can't advance in that game, you can just switch back to Portuguese until you get to the point you want and then switch back. Or maybe you are just starting to learn English, so you will play in Portuguese, and occasionally you will switch to the English language just to understand the words in the buttons, right? So you will start the way I did, just learning a few words here and there without actually learning how they connect, right? But that's something you can start doing. You will just learn a few words from the interface or the names of the items because they have graphics, so that will help you understand what those English words mean because you have the visual aid there. So that would be my advice on how to use video games nowadays to improve your English speaking skills. I mean, not speaking, but more reading and comprehension and vocabulary.
Yeah, I think that's really important. We're not saying like, oh, don't use your first language. It's not about that. But even if you say like, okay, 10 minutes or even 5 minutes in English, like it doesn't have to be the whole time. It just can be like, okay, just every day, I don't know, 10 minutes or something, just to give you a bit more exposure to English in something that you enjoy. Because I really feel that sometimes we have to do something, but if we can make the thing that we have to learn fun, and a lot of people do have to learn for school or whatever, if you can do it in a way that makes sense to you or is fun for you, then you're going to learn faster because your motivation is higher. So yeah, it doesn't mean you have to do it all the time, but maybe just, I don't know, 5-10 minutes and then go back to your first language. Or like, don't do it if you're tired, but if you've got lots of energy and you want to challenge, then change the language. As long as you know how to change it back, then it's okay.
Yeah, that can happen too, right? You just become blocked in that language. But yeah, it's generally not hard to switch the language. So if you start playing in your native language, you can just like memorize where the buttons are and how to access them if you need to switch back, right?
Because it looks the same, right? The interface is, I guess it might be different for some languages that read the other way, like right to left, but for Portuguese to English, it's going to look the same.
Yeah, exactly.
So
exactly the same. Yeah. And and about the exposure time you'll have with that language, I think that really depends on what's your English level right now when you start playing a game. Because if you already know some words, you can of course be exposed to that language more, right? So yeah, and if you're just starting, then like you said, like 5 minutes or just trying to understand what the buttons mean and the interface, I think that will be enough for you to learn a few things.
And also it's cool if you have an interest, like I think of some of the things that I'm learning about in Portuguese at the moment. I'm never going to learn this stuff in my class. My class is great. But like some of the other things that I'm reading about because friends are writing about them, that is different vocabulary. So it's normal if you start playing games and you haven't done it before in English, then there is going to be vocabulary that you will not learn at school. And that's okay. It doesn't, that's normal, and you can develop vocabulary and things that interest you. You might have to learn some new words because you may not have come across them before, but then it's more likely to stay in your mind because it's something you want to learn about in the first place. So
exactly. I remember it was much later. I think I was like, I don't know, 25, maybe 24. Yeah. And I wanted to learn a bit of French, right? So I went back to that old game, that multiplayer game that that helped me so much in learning English, and then I played it in French, and I went to a French server to start learning a few things, and just thinking, okay, maybe that trick will work twice. And yeah, it was really nice. I picked up a lot of words. I started learning how to write a few sentences, and at the time we already had Google Translate, so that was helping me do that. It was no longer my brother because we were both old enough to do our own stuff, right? I don't think he was even living with me at the time. So yeah, and that helped me again. So I didn't advance much after that because I just stopped playing, and I didn't invest again in my education. But I played for like, I don't know, 2 or 3 months, and the results were pretty noticeable. When I first started, I was like, every sentence I wrote came like straight from Google Translate. So I guess it was probably a nightmare for people who were reading me. But at the end of those 3 months, I was writing a lot of sentences on my own, right? And I was reading things and messages without constantly going to the dictionary or anything like that. So that's a pretty good strategy, especially if you're already a gamer, right? I don't think that if you don't enjoy playing games, I don't think you should play games just to learn a foreign language, because I think that would be we have the opposite effect that we want, right? We want to acquire language in a fun setting, or something like you enjoy doing, and the language is there, like you are mixing learning with just fun. But if you don't get so much fun from games, I think you will probably get frustrated twice, right? You will be frustrated by the game and by the language acquisition, because you will remove all the fun aspect that's around it.
Yeah, that's not what we want. But if you do enjoy this, then you heard it here that it's a good way to work on your English as well.
Yep.
So where can people find out, and where do you spend time? Where's a good place to connect with you if people want to do that? Social media?
Yeah, they can reach me out on LinkedIn, Diego Perez. I'm pretty active on the platform. I'm responsive. So if anyone wants to reach out and have a chat, or just to discuss how games helped you learn a foreign language, I would be very much interested to share and hear your stories too. So yeah.
Yeah, I'll include that link on our episodes page. And thanks again for coming. Thanks again for coming on the podcast. I couldn't have talked about this because this is out of my experience, and that's really why I wanted to bring someone who could give input on this topic, and you have. So it's great. Thanks for sharing your experiences, and yeah, have a great day.
Thank you for having me, Kirsty.
Thanks.
See you.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the English with Kirsty podcast. If you have any questions or comments, my email address is kirsty@englishwithkirsty.com, or you can go to www.englishwithkirsty.com/podcast, where you'll find information about the individual episodes.